to my sewing room. I just love the techniques we're going to share with you today. The name of the show is a shadow show, really. We have shadow applique borders and shadow applique inside a garment or a pillow. It is so much fun, and of course it is easy, and you know how much I enjoy sharing easy techniques. This beautiful pillow is really one of my favorites in the whole world. It has the machine embroidery on the inside and the shadow applique border, which is so easy. You really are not going to believe how easy it is. And then there's a shadow applique border on the first ruffle. This pillow has two little ruffles on it, and on the first ruffle there's a shadow applique border. The next pillow I'm going to share with you is also one of my very favorites. Isn't this pretty? It's shadow applique blue bows stitched with a blue thread all the way around, trimmed away. This almost looks like the wallpaper that Joanna had in her room when she was a little girl. And this has always been just one of my favorite things. Of course, you know how much I love the color blue, period. I have another pillow that's really pretty also. It has a pale pink center. Now the B is done in shadow applique, and the border that goes around is actually corded with coordinate thread. One of the prettiest shadow applique pillows. I have another shadow applique pillow which is quite beautiful. It has butterflies and flowers and an iris and little daisies and a real pretty ruffle around it with just a little bit of lace on the ruffle. Now, shadow applique does not have to be limited just to pillows. I have a beautiful little doll dress with a shadow applique bows on the doll dress. This is really one of the sweetest little skirts with a little shadow applique bordered skirt and bows on it. I also have a pretty wall hanging, really pretty for spring, that has flowers, and you know me and bows. I just love bows. So that's another piece of shadow applique. And finally, I have the really, really cute little collar for a little girl's dress that has fish underneath it in shadow applique. It's kind of an under the sea shadow applique. Won't you come along with me over to the technique boards, and I will share with you just how easy it is to do shadow applique. One of the things I would like to share with you before we start this lesson on shadow applique is the difference between Madeira applique and shadow applique. Now, what we're doing today is not Madeira applique. Madeira applique is where the colored fabric goes to the front. Shadow applique is where the colored fabric goes to behind. Now, we're doing shadow applique today. That kind of used to confuse me, and I thought maybe it might be good to clarify that for you in case any of you might be confused too. Okay, first of all, I have a piece of fabric. I'm going to trace off my scallops on the bottom. Now, in order to make this shadowed, I have to put, for instance, here I have a pretty piece of blue fabric I've stitched along the bottom, and so I can attach it. And then what makes it a shadow applique is that I've now turned that blue fabric that I stitched to the bottom, I have turned it to the back, so the blue fabric will shadow through slightly. Now then, it is time to go ahead and stitch. Now, I'm going to show you from the wrong side here. I stitch it from the side where I've traced on the scallop, and a tiny, tiny zigzag. I mean, so tiny it almost looks like a straight stitch, but it isn't. All right, after I have stitched it all along the bottom of the skirt, then I come back in and I trim it away, and therefore this becomes, let me turn it over, this becomes a shadow that peeks through. Now then, there's several ways if you want to finish off that tiny zigzag, which really it's a good idea. You can come back and just put a really heavy zigzag, kind of a satin stitch. Now what we have done here, this string that's hanging down, this is a gimp cord. What we have done is to zigzag on top and have the gimp cord. In other words, if you have a cording foot, use it. If not, just hold it in the middle. So we have zigzagged so it has a raised effect. Here is what it looks like with the pretty zigzag, or the satin stitching done in white. And let me show you once again, we have the blue shadow on the back. So it shadows, the blue shadows through, and we've done a really pretty white finish with a gimp cord enclosed in the satin stitch. Now here is another way to do this. Once again, let me show you, I have the blue in behind here. I've already done the first two steps. I put my stabilizer behind it, And in order to put in the hem this time, I'm going to use a hem stitch. Now, I'm not going to use green thread on my granddaughter's dresses, but I'm choosing this just to show you. I do use a stabilizer when I do wing needle entredo, or you can just zigzag. You don't have to have wing needle entredo. Then I'm going to tear away my stabilizer, as I'm doing here, and then I will cut away the blue fabric from the top. Now, let me share with you what it looks like when it's done properly. This is the white surface fabric, the fashion fabric. The blue shadow applique fabric is behind, and the wing needle entredo hem stitching has been stitched in, and then I did cut away the blue from behind, and that's what it looks like with just a little bit of blue shadowing through. Now, this is a little fun trick right here. Does it have to be just solid fabric? No, it does not. This time I have taken a print fabric, just a little calico. I have stitched it to the bottom of the fabric, of course drawn on the scallops, and turned it underneath. Now I'm going to hold this right here so you can see that we can just see a little hint of that print showing through. On this side I have stitched with the gimp cord and the satin stitch over it. The printed fabric has been cut away out of the scallops in the back. And if you will just look, it makes the prettiest little shadow. I really think that's one of the prettiest treatments. Now come along over to the sewing machine and I'll show you one of my favorite stitches. But remember, you can just zigzag, but you might want to do a pin stitch. Once again, the blue fabric is stitched to the bottom. It is turned up. And then I have also added stabilizer. And I've done one more thing. I have, in this case, gone ahead and trimmed away the scallops. I did a tiny little zigzag along my scallops I drew, and I trimmed away the blue fabric. And that's sometimes, but that's just something we haven't shown you yet, and sometimes that's easier. Now, I'm using a pin stitch and a wing needle at this point. And I'm simply going to go around. Now remember, I've got a tiny little zigzag, and I've already trimmed away my blue hem that I turned up. And this will hold it. I'm just going to do my pin stitch, and really then I won't have to go back in after I have already done my really beautiful pin stitch. I won't have to go back in now that I'm going to veer around to go in. Wait, I've got one more little stitch. Wait, I didn't stop at exactly the right place. Now then, I've got one more little stitch, and now it's time to turn. And I'm going to do my pin stitch or the point de Paris stitch, and I'm going to go all the way around just simply following, and I do have stabilizer. Now there are some people that say all you need to do is starch and don't stabilize, and that is good for some people. But when I use a wing needle, I really like to just go ahead and stick a piece of stabilizer. Many times I use on the pin stitch and the wing needle work, I really like just a tearaway stabilizer of some kind. But whatever your favorite stabilizer is, it's good. I just like something that helps me hold it because, you know, I'm really big into easy, and I think it makes it just a little bit easier. Now the beautiful pin stitch, I just come up to the point, and the little fingers of the pin stitch go into the fabric where the blue fabric is underneath. The straight line of the pin stitch, as you can see where the little holes show, is on the outside of the hem. In other words, the fingers of the stitch go in and catch that pretty blue scallop on the inside. Now I've almost gotten around my piece, and this is a really, really beautiful stitch. By the way, do you have to use a wing needle with a hem stitch? No, you do not have to use a wing needle. You can use like a 110 or 120 top stitch needle, and it really looks a lot like handwork when you do a pin stitch that way. Next, I have some beautiful lingerie to share with you. I think this gown and this robe just might be the prettiest that I personally have ever seen. It is a Swiss batiste, and it is a white Swiss batiste robe and gown. Around the neckline of the gown, you can see entredo and a real pretty gathered lace. Now, since this is the shadow applique show, of course, we're going to have shadow applique. Can you see the pretty pink shadow applique showing through? Let me turn it this way so you can see. It has pink fabric, the pink Nylona, which is peeking through. Now, as we come down on the robe, we see a pink sash, and look what starts again. The pretty shadow applique. This time it has been stitched down with feather stitch, and you can see just a little machine embroidery in between at every point. It comes all the way down to the bottom, and I would also like to just turn it back to show you that pretty design. You can see the pink in that pretty design too. Well, now that you've seen this beautiful robe, I want to show you this really pretty gown that's underneath it. And it's really a very comfortable, easy to wear gown. There is a shadow applique bias or shadow bias that finishes the neckline of the gown. And if you'll just allow me to pick this up a little bit, I think it'll be easier for me to explain and for you to see the whole thing. The bottom is so pretty. It has the same shadow applique border stitched down with feather stitch that we saw on the robe. Once again, let me just pick this up to show you the pink, a few strings on this here, to show you the pink that is underneath it and the feather stitching that is stitched the shadow applique down. This is a very easy technique to do, and if you'll come over here with me, I'm just going to share with you how easy it is to do. And this is the first time we've stitched something down with feather stitch, so that'll be interesting. First of all, in order to make the shadow applique borders, you simply trace on all of the borders. Now you can see I've already done the feather stitching here. One row just for decorative purposes, and one row that really holds the shadow up behind. Let's see how that's done. Trace on all of your designs, and I have this is the pink border on the back, and I have this stitched to the bottom and folded up. Now this one already shows that the first row of feather stitching has been done, and then I will trim that away and do the second row of feather stitching. Okay, I've traced all of it on, and let me set, I've got my feather stitch set here, and I'm simply going to put on a foot that's really easy to see. And you know what? Some people might not put stabilizer behind this, but I will tell you a small secret. I like stabilizer when I'm going to be turning corners like this, and when I'm going to be doing any reasonably heavy stitching. It just seems, especially on Swiss batiste, it's just a lot easier if I have my stabilizer behind it. And you can see that pretty feather stitch that's going in behind there. Now I'm going to come up real slowly into the point. And by the way, I do not have a wing needle. I'm going to lift the presser foot, turn around, and follow this curve once again with my feather stitch. Remember, you don't have to sew really, really fast either. Sometimes I like to think that I sew so fast, and maybe if I would sew a little bit on slower speed, it would just make it a little bit easier to turn all these curves. And accuracy is important. Well, a little bit of practice is important, I think, anytime you're doing work like this. So I'm going to go all the way around with the feather stitch like that. Once again, let me pull up my finished one so you can see really what it was that I did. I folded the hem up double. I came in and did my first feather stitch, trimmed away the hem, and did the second feather stitch. Let me come in here and show you the two sets of feather stitching that I did. And then I will come back. Do you see where these little diamonds are drawn on? That's where I'm going to do some kind of little decorative stitch, and it would be just as pretty. Those little diamonds are here. In other words, at all the points there's a little diamond drawn on. It would be just as pretty to do a little machine embroidered flower, or maybe a bullion rosebud, or maybe any other kind of little flower you wanted to put in there, silk ribbon rose. It really wouldn't matter what you wanted to put in there as your little decorative touch, but a little something might be stitched at every point. And next, I have a very special guest, Kathy Neal, who will share some magnificent hand embroidery with you. I'm so happy to have Kathy Neal as my guest. Kathy is one of the lead designers for So Beautiful magazine. She's been teaching for many years at my Martha Pullen School of Art Fashion, and I might add that she's traveled all over the country teaching embroidery and other fine needle arts. Kathy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Martha. It's always good to be here.
This nightshirt is fabulous, one of our patterns for the series. Tell
Absolutely.
me what you're going to teach and what's on that nightshirt that you're going to teach today.
Well, today we're going to talk about the chain stitch. And the chain stitch on this particular garment is around the field-terre. It's this little blue line, and also here on the doll dress I've used it around the field-terre there too, and it's the little green line here. The chain stitch is a very historical stitch, and I would like to start by saying that chain stitch is just one of the names for this stitch. It has been called tambour work. It is also the basis for the Beauvais stitch over in France, and it has been around for quite a number of centuries. To begin our chain stitch, we start with a waist knot just on the top of our embroidery fabric, and we come up from the back on the line where we want our chain stitch to be, and our chain stitch begins with a simple lazy daisy. When we come up, we bring the thread, emerges right on the design line, the needle re-emerges into that same point about one fabric thread away. You do a sewing stitch, an in and out stitch. Pull it with the thread under the needle, and to make the chain, our last part of the stitch is, instead of tacking this down as we would for a lazy daisy, we start right at that point again, about one fabric thread away, and make another. So this is just a chain of lazy daisy stitches, and we continue this. You can vary your thread, the size of your needle, and the amount of fabric you pick up with each stitch to make it large or small. And Martha, I have another example. This is rather large chain stitch that I've demonstrated for our viewers this afternoon, but I wanted to share with you. This, to me, is the quintessential use of this stitch. These are two lovely hand-worked handkerchiefs that I brought back from Paris. They were designed by the masters at the Maison Malebranche, and you see here how they have actually used very, very, very tiny chain stitch to create these lovely motifs in the bottom, in the corners of these hankies. It's a wonderful, historic, easy to use stitch for stems, vines, as well as motifs themselves.
Well, Kathy, that is absolutely fabulous, and I know that's one of the stitches that a lot of people are familiar with the name chain stitch, but I certainly didn't know it had all of the other names too.
When done as tambour work or Beauvais, it's actually not done with a needle and thread. It uses a very special tool with a wooden handle and a needle-like point to it that acts as a crochet hook type that pulls the stitch. Very interesting stitch.
Well, embroidery is very interesting, period.
It is.
Kathy, thank you so much once again for being here with us to share your lovely techniques and your absolutely incredible style of embroidery. And now I have a really interesting and very pretty and feminine home decorating project for you. I have a beautiful little pink pillow to share with you. Now let me just tell you a little bit about what I think about this beautiful pillow. When Joanna was a little girl, she used to love wearing all the heirloom clothes, the French dresses, and then later on the beautiful blouses with the smocked collars. And then there got to be a time when she was a very sophisticated teenager when she said, well now Mother, as much as I love these dresses, I just can't wear them any longer because I'm too old. So what I did after that, and the people that loved to sew for her, like my daughter-in-law Suzanne, loved to make pretty things for Joanna, and she loved home decorating. We would make a pillow for her every birthday or Christmas, one or the other, and she loved her French sewing. I think she probably would have still even worn it if it hadn't have been that she was just too old to wear it. But we made a pillow for every occasion. So that was a wonderful way that we could still have something French sewn and handmade for her. And she has a wonderful pink bedroom. I say has, of course she's married and has her own home now. And by the way, has a lot of those pillows in her guest bedroom. But we made a pillow for her every year. Now that's what this reminds me of, a pillow for Joanna. This is a really pretty little pink silk dupioni pillow. It's made out of two of my favorite fabrics, a cotton netting plus the pink silk dupioni. Now these little strips are just little bias strips that have been turned and stitched down, but now not stitched down all the way. As you can see, I can run my finger up behind there. They've only been stitched down with little tiny French knots made out of silk ribbon. Now this little pillow, as you can see too, is not finished along the edge. There's no reason to finish, just netting. You just simply trim it. And I'm going to also turn it over for you so you can see it just has the plain silk dupioni on the back. How on earth can you make this pillow? Very, very simply. I have my bias strips of silk dupioni. First of all, though, I've got to run the gathering threads and the netting here, run the gathering threads around here, 2 gathering threads around here, 2 gathering threads around here, 2 gathering threads around the top. Then I make the silk dupioni bias pieces and start shaping them. You may remember on lace shaping, and by the way, this is usually easier just done on a lace shaping board. Of course, I could just pick it up and pin it too, but you might want to just do it on a lace shaping board and then give it a little shot of steam and then pick it up and pin it. So remember, when you shape laces or when you shape silk dupioni bias strips, you just simply pin the outside. And by the way, do you see how easy it is to shape bias strips? That's one of my favorite things to do. All right, I'm going to shape my bias strips all the way around on this row and this row. Now, when I get ready to sew the pillow together, of course, I've got another strip, another piece of the fan-shaped silk dupioni back here. I will simply stitch it together all the way up to this line, leaving this loose, and then turn it right side out, and then the edge of the pillow will have this little section right here. Let me bring the pillow back one more time and just show you how pretty that is. This is a sweet little pillow, and you might even sign it on the back and date it with your fabric pins or stitch it in your sewing machine. The date, for whom it is, and the occasion. Happy birthday, Christmas, or whatever. And now then, I'd like to take you to my attic. I have 2 really fascinating dresses to share with you in my attic today. The first is the real antique. I purchased this in England many years ago. The second is the reproduction. And I'm going to share both of them with you, but really, as you look at these dresses, and by the way, speaking of England, I think either one of these dresses are so elegant and so beautiful, they could be worn to a tea party at Queen Elizabeth's palace and be perfectly appropriate. Now, let's just look at this little antique dress, starting at the neckline. Do you see there's nothing but tucks and then a sweet little ruffle? The sleeve is absolutely precious. It has a ruffle at the top, a ruffle at the bottom, and really sweet little tucks. And then as we come on down to the skirt, you can see there are 4 little tucks and a ruffle, and then fabric underneath, 4 little tucks and a ruffle, 4 little tucks and a ruffle. Both of these dresses I would put in the category of heirloom sewing on a budget. Do you know that if I had made this dress, I'm going to pull this one over here too, so we can look at the new dress. If I had made these dresses out of a little poly cotton batiste, which I didn't. Now, these are made out of Swiss batiste. These elegant dresses could have been done for about $12. Now, I did use a Swiss batiste, so that did run the cost up. But this is French sewing on a budget. If you would like to make it budget, do you see we've reproduced the tucks, the little 1/8-inch tucks, just the little fabric ruffle. Over here, the little sleeve that's just exactly like the little antique dress. And then come on down to this really pretty skirt with the 4 tucks and then the ruffle, the 4 tucks and the ruffle, and the 4 tucks and the ruffle. Absolutely a beautiful dress. Now, do you notice how full this dress is? We generally like to put 45 inches in the front and 45 inches in the back on our heirloom dresses. I think that just really makes them elegant. Now, why did I reproduce it in the first place? Well, this dress I wanted for Anna, my little niece. And when it was time for me to put this dress on her, which my sister, her mother, Mary, thought was beautiful, this one was way too little. So we reproduced that, and Anna had the dress that her mother, my sister, and I love so much. Thank you so much for joining me in my sewing room today. I just love it when you come to visit. And you know, I would certainly like to invite you to come back next time.